Empower People. This is a show that brings you inspirational stories, expert insights, and transformative advice on ESPN Richmond, powered by MikeKingBiz. I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, MBA, founder of Empower People, and each week we dive into topics that are rooted in how purpose drives business and positive impact. So join us as we connect with dynamic guests, explore innovative ideas, and empower you to evolve and thrive in every aspect of your life. Stay tuned because together we can achieve greatness. Let's evolve together. To learn more about Empower People, you can visit www.empowerpeople.org. That's MPWRPeople.org, or find us on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn. #Empower People. So now let's dive into today's show with our very special guest, Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, also candidate for Virginia Governor in 2025. Abigail Spanberger has always served our communities, our Commonwealth, and our country. Abigail began her career of public service as federal law enforcement officer, working money laundering cases and tracking narcotic traffickers with the U.S. Postal Inspection Service. Abigail then joined the CIA as a case officer. She worked undercover her entire time at the agency, collecting intelligence, managing assets, and overseeing high-profile programs to combat terrorism and keep Americans safe. In 2014, Abigail brought her family back home to Virginia, where she and her husband grew up, and soon began a career in the private sector. In 2018, Abigail became the first Democrat since 1968, as well as the first woman ever to be elected to represent Virginia's 7th congressional district in the U.S. House. Abigail has led bipartisan efforts that have been signed into law to prevent fentanyl overdoses, protect Virginia's natural resources, and support our veterans. And she has fought to lower prescription drug costs, strengthen workforce training programs for Virginia students, clean up Washington, and protect Virginians' fundamental rights. Abigail grew up in Henrico County, Virginia. She attended J.R. Tucker High School, is a proud graduate of the University of Virginia. Abigail and her husband Adam are the proud parents of 3 school-aged daughters. And now, as Empower People fashion, we're going to share one fun fact about Abigail Spanberger. We both know the late and great Kim Drew Wright, who is the founder of the LWCC, Liberal Women of Chesterfield County. So without further ado, let's welcome Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to have you. So if you know the flavor of the show, we always get off topic. That's me being my sarcasm. We always talk about purpose-driven leadership. And that's why we wanted you to come on today to talk about your perspective, what that looks like. So the first question is, what actually made you pursue a career in public service and leadership?
So I began pursuing a career in public service because, frankly, it's the model that I grew up with in my home. My mother was a nurse, and so her focus was on serving the community, serving her patients. And my dad was a career law enforcement officer, and they literally said when we were kids, over and over and over again, there's no greater calling, there's no greater work than service to country. And so I always wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. I always wanted to have a mission-focused career. And for me, that meant initially following directly in his footsteps as a federal agent, and then ultimately forging my own path as a CIA officer, where I was focused on helping policymakers as I saw it, as I viewed the mission, the president, military leadership, our diplomats make good decisions, because I was out there collecting information, collecting foreign intelligence that would kind of inform some of the highest level assessments of the challenges and threats that the United States faced, but also inform the decisions of how to take action in the face of those threats.
That makes sense. So I think it's interesting that both your mom was a nurse and your dad also served. There was acts of service. It's all fundamentally in this acts of service. Is that how you would define purpose-driven leadership? It's just like rooted in service?
I think I think people can bring purpose-driven leadership to whatever sector they might be working in, but for, and I think, across the board, folks who are in business, athletes, and anyone with kind of a voice or is kind of some level of ability to create a corporate culture or community culture, I think can pursue purpose-driven leadership. But for me, the places that I've always wanted to serve have been in that mission-focused service to country, service to community space. And so in my life, certainly the purpose-driven leadership is kind of twofold. One, it's the way that I lead my team, the way that I can demonstrate my priorities for my constituents, the ways that I'm responsive to them as an elected leader, the way that I take ownership for the choices that I make in my votes, in my actions. But also for me, it's also the path where I've pursued this type of service. And for me, that's been predominantly in the public sector in service to country.
I love your answer, and be prepared that after this interview, the clip where you said anybody can be a purpose-driven leader is going to be pulled out.
Yeah.
Because it's true. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
what your role or your job title is. We all have purpose.
Well, and I think, there's really great, one of my colleagues here in the halls of Congress represents a district in Pennsylvania, Chrissy Houlahan. She is just an extraordinary person. She began her career in the Air Force. From there, she helped found what grew to be a pretty large size sneaker and athletic apparel business. Then she kind of in a turn decided that she wanted to become a teacher. So she went to a Teach for America program and taught in Philadelphia. When she found that some of the students she was teaching, the biggest hurdle that they faced in learning high school science was challenged literacy. She founded a nonprofit related to how to increase childhood literacy, recognizing that that's an indicator of success later. And so it's interesting because here's a woman who's had success in business, who's had success in her military service. But interestingly, then her husband was one of the initial founders of the B Corps movement, where even within for-profit businesses, they can choose to judge themselves. They can choose to affirm certain values, both for their employees, but for the communities where they're doing business, or the communities where they're sourcing items, or the larger economic pipeline where they're, depending on the business sector, where they're working. And so I think it's, for me, my service has been pretty, public sector, service to country, service to the people of the 7th District. But I think that there are so many places where you can bring that service mindset. And it can be after hours. It can be in the volunteerism that people choose to do. It can be working in the football boosters or the chorus boosters for a local high school. I mean, the opportunities, it can be through service organizations like the Rotary. Like, there's so many places where people can bring and leverage their leadership skills in service to something, someone, or the larger community, that I think it's really limitless if you have the mindset of kind of looking for places to bring that leadership.
I agree. And I think I like the examples you gave, because sometimes people feel like the job title has to reflect, but sometimes it's through volunteer and other efforts. It comes in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
So I'd like to follow up with another question. So how, you mentioned constituents earlier, so this is a really good pivot, but how do you balance the immediate needs of your constituents with the long-term vision and purpose? So I'm going to use an example to make sense, try to help make sense of this question. So there's a lot of small businesses and nonprofit leaders who will be listening to this program, because a lot of them are listening to Empower People. And so how do you manage the long-term vision of the needs for Virginia as a whole with the immediate needs of the small businesses and nonprofits, which are your constituents? How do you do that?
So I think they go hand in hand, and the way that you do it is you can have a view of the immediacy of now with also the longer term impact. So, one of the greatest challenges that I hear from small business owners and medium-sized and large-sized business owners, right? And even our military and government entities, but I'll go back to the small business owners, is workforce and the pipeline of folks that they are or are not able to hire, the skill set that those people, whether they're straight out of high school, straight out of college, straight out of certification, or a career changer, the skill set that they do or don't bring. And so that's a challenge that's impacting them right now. And so, being responsive and in the here and now is actually also recognizing that part of what needs to change or be improved upon is a long-term look at K through 12, is a refreshed look at the way that certification programs that we can pay for them, that people can finance them. So I lead a bipartisan piece of legislation, a bipartisan bill with Congressman Whitman from Virginia's 1st District, that for anybody who's using a 529 savings vehicle to save for their kid to go to college, well, there's a lot of limitations on what, or someone can use it to save for their own education. There's a lot of limitations on the way that that program can be used. But if I'm hearing from employers that they need people with these certifications, but not necessarily a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, then why wouldn't we give the person the flexibility that if that is the credential or the piece of paper, not the bachelor's of arts, not the associate's degree, but this particular certification or that one, if the goal of that 529 program was to help people prepare for, save for an education that they could use in the workforce, giving the flexibility, recognizing what I'm hearing from business owners and from families and individuals as well, that's having that longer term view, recognizing that the investments that we make in K through 12 now, and even preschool and early education programs, that's an investment in the workforce that will be in our economy in 1 to 17 years, depending upon the age of that child. And so recognizing that sometimes the issue is this nonprofit needs support for a grant they're applying to, or this locality has a major issue with water infrastructure and they need us to respond now. But sometimes it's the infrastructure law that we passed where they don't have the acute issue right now, but we're planning for it, right? Because let's say the city of Fredericksburg, right? There's a bridge between Fredericksburg and Stafford, heavily trafficked by people, by commerce. It's in good, it's in good condition now. But if we wait till all of a sudden there's an acute problem to repair that bridge, then we're risking the strength of the economy. We're risking the strength of commerce. We're risking potentially safety of people and anyone who might cross that bridge. And so with the infrastructure bill that we passed, now that bridge is on path towards having proactive, preventative, and needed repairs, but before we get to that sort of dire place. And I could keep answering this question over and over and over, so I'll stop right there. Well, I'll give one more, but sometimes the issue is in contending with constituent services. So a veteran who calls my office because they've been denied coverage for a particular type of illness, right? And we dealt with this. We had a constituent who made his story very, very public, so I feel comfortable sharing it. He, through his service in the military, as a military firefighter, someone who served overseas, he faced exposures and ended up being diagnosed with a very severe type of cancer, totally consistent with toxic exposures. And we worked with him before he passed away to ensure that we were trying to make sure he was getting every benefit he had earned through his service, every benefit that was there and available to his children. But after he passed away is when we were able to pass the Honoring Our Pact Act, which elements of that would have made his pathway to getting benefits clearer, not without hurdles, because there's other elements related to, specifically to military firefighters and those specific types of exposures that, I'm still leading legislation on. But in the immediacy of helping him, we were attuned to just one more example of this larger problem that, you can't have 200,000 constituent service efforts to try and fix a problem. There, it needs to be a legal remedy through the Honoring Our Pact Act, which is, one of the many reasons this particular example is one of the many reasons why I was really proud to work on that bill in its development, but ultimately in its passage as well. And now it's law.
I like that. And everything you're talking about supports something that we say on the program, which is you got to deal with now. It's like I always use the analogy of healthcare. If you're going into the emergency room and you're having chest pains and they find out you're having a heart attack, they don't say, well, let's find out what first caused that heart attack. Let's change those behaviors. No, we're going to address the heart attack first. But then once we get that under control, that's going to give us an opportunity to go, what was the source of that heart attack? Why did you have that heart attack in the first place, and address those issues? It's like you got to do triage and strategic planning all at the same time. Now, I want to follow up because Senator Tim Kaine was on the show last month, and he was talking about what he was hearing as he was campaigning from like small business owners and whatnot. I just like to hear, what are you hearing as you're out there talking to small business owners? What seems to be top of mind for them right now? You did mention workforce, but I know there might be more.
So, it's a little bit of everything. Certainly, workforce chief among them. That is a consistent across all sectors. Um, Depending upon the industry that they are in, some residual supply chain disruptions, residual issues with increased costs for precursor items that they might need to buy, or to bring in supplies for their business, and just overall issues that relate to a healthy, engaged workforce. So, so many business owners who provide healthcare coverage for their employees, just recognizing the cost to them, the challenges that sometimes they face in providing a really important and necessary benefit to their workforce. Um, some of the issues related to substance use disorder and mental health challenges. Some workforces are impacted by workers themselves dealing with mental health challenges and needing support in that space, or a loved one, right? You can have the best workforce in the world, but if you've got a couple folks who are worried about their kids because their kids are really struggling, that impacts. And if you've got to bring it back, you've got a purpose-driven leader or a small business owner who takes care of their workforce and who's built a business with a kind of a real desire to grow something that they believe in whatever sector. The health and happiness and stability of their workforce impacts that larger ecosystem. So, chief among them, the things that I hear about regularly would be workforce issues, some supply chain issues, some cost issues. But then beyond that, it's a little bit of everything, and which I think speaks to like the broad types of businesses that exist certainly across the 7th District and across Virginia overall. And I represent a lot of farmers and producers, of course, themselves, small business owners. So there's some unique challenges facing the agriculture and those who, that's their livelihood. And so being able to work with them, I'm a member, I'm the only Virginian on the Agriculture Committee. And so in pushing for this year's Farm Bill, making sure that we're recognizing the unique challenges that face this sector of small business owners, the family farmer or the small farmer, has been kind of chief among some of the priorities that I've led on in those Farm Bill negotiations.
That's good. Side note, my husband's family are a line of farmers, but up in New York. But yes, they have unique challenges as well. They have unique challenges as well. So now I want to say, what is the advice you would offer an individual or organization right now that's listening to the show to help them cultivate that sense of purpose with everybody that they are leading right now? Big question, right?
It's a big question. It's an interesting question. I think it's have a focus on whatever the business sector is, right? Nonprofit, for profit. recognizing that the people who are going to come and work within your company, that are going to be part of growing it, making it successful, recognizing that they have things they care about, that they have things that matter to them. I've spoken to a number of business owners who will do some community volunteerism, so that someone's going to their job that they love, that they enjoy, but that they get that additive connection, that their job values the work of the food bank, and so going to spend some volunteer hours together in a team building fashion, focused on something other than the business, right? Like, there's value in doing that, because you get people. It's sort of the same principle of, an office goes to a happy hour. You get people outside of the normal work, work, work. They get to know each other a little bit as people. But I have just witnessed a lot of success of people recognizing that doing that in a volunteer capacity, spending that time together kind of in support of something outside of the business, is not just kind of good for the way that an employee might feel engaged with the company they work for, but it has real value to that business, and certainly to the community where that bit of volunteerism might be brought. And this looks like so many different things. There's a lot of high school programs that will ask for business leaders to come in and interview kids, so that a kid who might not have the parents at home who can give them the most up-to-date advice in terms of what to do in an interview, or importantly, sometimes kids don't always take the advice that we parents give them. So sometimes it's an independent adult saying, let's do a practice interview. How are you going to be? Let's make sure you're at your best when you go in for that job interview, because you might have the great skill set, you might have the drive, but if you've never done a job interview before, you've never done a job interview. And so there's so many places where our local businesses can tie themselves into a community in a way that is, I think, deeply fulfilling for the employees, certainly for the business owners, but for the larger community. We see it a lot with the different fundraising drives for our schools, where a certain percentage of proceeds from this local restaurant or this local ice cream shop goes to the local school, or to the drama boosters, or the football team, or all of these sorts of things. And so I guess I've given more examples than I have advice, but I think that when we are endeavoring to see kind of the impact of our actions on a larger community, and of course, as somebody who votes on laws and delivers constituent services, like, mine is fairly obvious from a broad brush standpoint. But I also think that there's the less obvious, right? Like, there's the way I choose to talk about politics of it all. There's the way I kind of choose to take responsibility for a vote that may not be popular with some of my constituents. There's the way that I recognize that as an elected representative who's on television from time to time, the onus is on me if I see a constituent who kind of clearly wants to push me on something or ask me about something, but they might feel uncomfortable doing it. And so even just saying, did you want, like, I'm here, like, do you want to talk about anything? And giving people like the entree in some cases to say something relatively, oh, I was really upset about this, or why did you do this? And so I think that if you are focused on, like, the purpose behind why you chose to start this business, or why you've chosen to pursue a career in a particular sector, there's always there's the obvious bit, right? Oh, I want to have a successful business, or I like this industry, or I saw an opening in the marketplace, right? But that couldn't be the only thing that led you to be successful, right? You open a restaurant. It's not just that you like to cook, or it's not just I've always wanted to own a restaurant. Did you want to bring community together? Did you want to expose people to a certain type of food, right? Like, thinking about what is behind the things that drive us, and then the impact and the engagement that we have, even with the restaurant example, right? There's a lot of people, at times can be tough. There's a lot of people that might, go out to a restaurant and it is a, like, once a year special treat. and creating a culture when you walk into that restaurant, whether it's, fast casual or something fancy, like that might be somebody's like, we've been saving for this, right? This is an extraordinary experience. And so creating a culture where every person who engages with a customer is recognizing that, this could be a really special day for that person coming in for lunch, or it could be a tough day, right? And
Right.
creating a culture in that restaurant or in that small business where you kind of recognize you don't know what the other person is it their celebration, or are they just hungry, right?
Mm-hmm.
uh in that kind of purpose-driven leadership, if you can communicate to your employees and everybody else like why this matters, like why did you endeavor to create a restaurant or this small business, right? Those are not easy feats.
Not at all.
There's more to it than just the mechanics of opening a restaurant or starting a small business. And I think the more that you can communicate that to your employees or to your customers or to the community that you engage with, I think the more opportunities for those like moments of leadership uh you can create, whether you're like cognizant of it or not even.
Now, I'm going to scan, and I feel like we may have some questions, but I also know I was informed that you have got to run, right? So may I have
I
you
do
back?
I have votes, so I have if you turn on C-SPAN, I got to make it to votes, but I also know how quickly I can walk to vote, so I probably have time for one question.
Okay, let me scan, because it's going to take me a moment to scan here. I'm getting a lot of outstanding information. Lots of people saying you got to be watching this. Um, a lot about community, no questions, just a lot of comments about examples that you gave. They really like that. They really like the community impact. So good job with the examples. You were worried about it, but I'm just gonna throw in here, since you said you got 1 second. When you were talking about the restaurant owners, now my grandparents on my father's side were long past before I came into this world. But I've heard about my grandfather's grocery store forever, because it was the town's grocery store. And you would think, okay, that grocery store is just selling, product. But I learned within the last couple of years that it didn't. They would go out, my grandfather would go out of his way and get his little wagon and bring to families products that they couldn't get. He would drive quite the distance, get these products during the Great Depression to deliver them. And they were so thankful that the town put the wedding on. They didn't pay for the wedding, like the town put the wedding on for my grandparents. And then when people had a hard time through like the world wars and whatnot, paying for their grocery bills, he'd say, well, what can you do? What kind of labor would you be willing to do? So they ended up, he had asthma issues like me. And so he had a cabin built up in the mountains. But guess what? Those were all the customers that couldn't pay for their groceries helped build that cabin.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think that's the point, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
about the groceries, it was about serving the community.
Well, and you think about the overall impact, right? So that's probably family members who were able to bring food home for their kids. Then those are kids who, didn't kind of feel the dire impact of hunger as much during the Great Depression. Like the ripples all of that are pretty significant. And there's just so many places where the impact and the example that we can have, no matter the sector, it can be so substantially impactful. And I think there's always like we look to the sort of obvious things, but I think back on some of the people who've been most impactful in my life along the way. And yes, teachers, yes, employers, right? But it's often, I think, in ways that they probably aren't necessarily anticipating it. It's I bumped into a teacher at my daughter's school who told me a story that my mother-in-law had been his English teacher, and he gave a very specific example of a time that she caught him cheating, and she gave him a 0, and like his grade went in the tank. But he said to her, like, please don't tell my mother. This will kill my mother. And he explained he was, raised by a single mother, and his mother would have been devastated at the idea that he had been cheating. And so as he recounted to me, my mother-in-law gave him the 0, like he was totally on the hook for this, like accountable. But she didn't call his mother. And he, in discussing it with me, said that that was one of like the biggest demonstrations of grace that he as a person has ever felt. And, now my mother-in-law was his high school English teacher, and now he is a high school English teacher. And he said, that experience informs sometimes the choices he makes with his own students. And so he said, please tell her. And so I called my mother-in-law immediately and told her the story. And she remembered him. And she's like, oh, and she remembered him as like a really nice kid. She remembered him, but she didn't remember that story. And she said, oh, he was so like, she did not connect that this kid would have like cheated at any point in time on a test. And so she didn't remember any of that. And she was so delighted. And I mean, he was in her class in the 80s, right? And so it's so interesting because for her, not to put words in my mother-in-law's mouth, like she remembered him because she remembered him as a lovely young man. He was very funny, these sorts of things. But like the thing that was so incredibly impactful for him wasn't front of mind for her, right? And decades later, like he's telling me this story. And so I think it's really interesting, the places that in any way, right? Even the example of like if you're a business owner and you make the clear point of, okay, we're, this afternoon we're gonna all, go volunteer at the food bank. And I love Feed More and volunteering there. So I'll use that as an example. Like, what are you signaling to your employees? Like, probably so much more than you might ever know. You might have an employee who struggled with food insecurity as a kid and now feels so gratified that they work at a place where like that challenge is understood and respected, or somebody who just feels great about the fact that, they work at this for-profit company that they like, they, get a salary, they like all these sorts of things, but that there's a little bit more to it in the ethos of the business. And so I think there's just so many places where the impact and the engagement that we have with others, sometimes it's not front of mind or not ever even obvious potentially like the impact that we can have. But it's I think this, to bring it all back, like this is the part of like being purposeful in the things that you do. And sometimes you just do something and sometimes it actually has a pretty significant impact whether you know it or not.
And for me, sometimes I've learned the thing that I think is going to be the most purposeful and have the best impact is not necessarily it's the thing that was the smallest. You just never really, but
You never know.
You never know. You just keep doing the good work. You just keep doing the good work.
That's
Well,
right.
I want to thank you for your time. And I always, would you be open to having another conversation at some point? Because I feel like we only hit the tip of the iceberg. And when you were just sharing the story about about your mother-in-law and the boy who cheated on the exam, I'm like, how amazing is it that she did not, you define him by that act? That's a whole other conversation, right? But
Yeah.
anyway, that's really
Yeah,
cool.
she didn't remember that part of the story.
That's cool. That is so cool. So I'm going to wrap up the show. So we had to, bundle it a nice tight bow here. But I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Evolve Together with Empower People show here on ESPN Richmond. I want to thank Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger for being such purpose-driven and purposeful guest today. I'm your host, Tiffany Joy Greene, MBA, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. We hope today's episode inspired you, provided valuable insights, and empowered you to take the next step in your purpose-driven journey. Don't forget to connect with Empower People on social media, share your thoughts, and join the Empower People community, or as I like to call it, evolution, where education, connection, and support is offered to mission and purpose-driven leaders to drive positive impact and empower people. Until next time, keep evolving, stay empowered, and remember that together we can achieve greatness. Have a fantastic day, and we'll see you on the next episode of Evolve Together with Empower People. Let's evolve together.
Thank you.
Thank you.